This is the side quest, where I write about the financial accounts and the strategy of video games companies. In this series, I talk to people who have a wealth of experience and knowledge of working within the industry, where we look past the headlines and take time to work through the themes that affect the business. So Luke, could you give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I fell in love with AI 3 years ago. No, I fell in love with AI when I was 13 years old, which is longer ago than I'm prepared to admit out loud right now. But there was, I've talked about this extensively a few places, but there was this little game called Creatures. And it was little side-scrolly, kind of like Tamagotchi on steroids. And I got playing this as a 13-year-old, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Turned out that a lot of what was backing that game was what they called artificial life at the time. It was a lot of algorithms and kind of research that had spun out of academia at University of Cambridge. And I sort of went, this is what I want to do with my life. And in only the way that a sort of deeply autistic, precocious, obnoxious teenager can, I started printing out research papers that, looking back, I definitely didn't understand, but I got my research papers and turned that into undergraduate program in AI at University of Edinburgh. Didn't do amazing at that, if I'm being honest. I don't know what your audience keeps. I came out with a 2-2, which you will understand, not the best. Um, uh, just didn't know what to do with my life. So I went around again and got a Master of Science. Didn't know what to do with my life again, and started talking to some of the profs at Edinburgh. And I said, look, I really want to keep going, but like, I don't care about making algorithms like zero point 0.2 milliseconds faster. And that they said, you should go over to University of Strathclyde and talk to this guy. So I sort of started working in an AI lab at Strathclyde that was trying to be a little bit more games adjacent and apply AI technology to games. Um, and from there, Twitter, this would have been like 2008-ish. And Twitter was not the cesspool it is today. It was actually quite a useful little tool. And managed to kind of build a great community with game devs. And we engage with studios like Ubisoft Reflections, some of the Guildford studios, and really started to kind of think about how we could apply this research in an industry context. And then I just kind of fell out with academia completely. Turns out that if you want to publish in academia, you have to write 8 pages, you submit it to the conference. You will have to pay to go to the conference, even if you're accepted. And 3 people are going to review your thing. And because you didn't cite one person's work, they will ding you for it and reject your paper, and then you're back to the drawing board. And what I kind of my kind of life hack was okay, so industry conferences let you write 2 paragraphs. They give you an answer real quick, and if they want you to speak at an industry conference, they pay for your pass to be there rather than making you pay to be there. So that's what I'm gonna do. Um, did a lot of industry speaking. I was writing for AIGameDev.com, rest in peace, for Gamma Sutra, what's now GameDeveloper.com, Pocket Gamer, GI.biz, all of which was enough to get me on Zynga's radar. And they came to me and said, hey, would you like to move to San Francisco and become a data scientist? I said, yes, absolutely. I do not stay in the arse end of Glasgow, thank you very much. What's data science? And they said, oh, well, when we say data science, we mean this, this, and this. And I was like, 80s machine learning? Yeah, I can do 80s machine learning. Let's go. Because a lot, this would have been like 14 when ML and data science was having its moment. But data science was really just a rebrand on some old stuff that got a lick of paint and a lot of investor attention. Um, so I joined Zynga, bounced around a bit internally. Um, as these things go, there was a bit of an executive turf war at one point. The exec that I was considered the right hand to lost. I kind of got benched for a bit. And that allowed me to start working with some of the new concept teams at Zynga. So effectively, kind of hanging out on what was an indie game team, effectively, getting paid a San Francisco data scientist salary. It was amazing. Um, and one of my things is that I'm a strong generalist across games. Um, but I'm very deep on the AI and ML. And one of the things that the leadership of that team in particular wanted to keep me around for was economy optimization, basically. Actually getting the tuning, getting things dialed in so that the progression was going to be exactly what we wanted it to be. But you can't do that till you've got an economy. And when you're a brand new game, you don't have an economy out the gate. So I was kind of hanging out being kind of a mid-level designer. Um, Unfortunately, there was a leadership turnover with that team. New folks came in who saw me doing mid-level design work and went, "Well, you must be a mid-level designer." Um, and that turned into me sort of saying, "Look, you need to actually hire a designer for this role. If this is what you think I am, you should probably go find somebody better than me, and I'll find a different spot to be." So transitioned to running the central analytics group for Zynga. Um, that was a lot of fun. I think I've told this story enough times out loud that this isn't breaking my NDA. The Zynga's always had this kind of mythos for being amazing at analytics. That has been part of the core Zynga legend. And it was true originally, and it was true in the Facebook days. By 20, this would have been like 17. Honestly, they'd done the classic corporate thing of sitting back, resting on their laurels, and kind of the state of the art had passed them by a bit. There was a new chief data officer who'd come in as Frank Jabot had taken over Zynga. And he said, we sat down together and he said, "How far behind do you think we are?" I said, "I don't know, man, maybe like 3 to 5 years." And he said, "Yep, cool, you've got 18 months, figure it out." Classic corporate. But about 18 months later, I got to go to a conference that Netflix were the headline sponsor for. And you know how these things go. They get up and they do the song and dance about how great they are. And they put up a slide that was like, "Look at our tech stack." And I was like, "I've got 60% of that. Uh, and you're Netflix. So mission accomplished." And that's when the conversation kind of shifted a little bit. And we sort of said, "Well, look, how do we not get caught out of position like this again?" And I'd obviously got this deep background with the AI stuff, and I said, "Look, there is going to be more to this than kind of the sales and offers and likely to churn and propensity scoring. Like all of that stuff is like table stakes. It's not what good's going to look like." And they agreed with me, and they let me found an AI skunkworks group, and we literally sat in the basement of the old Zynga building in SF, dropped off everybody's radar. There were three of us initially, and we followed the skunkworks playbook, and we just built, um, and we secured a whole bunch of patents. We shipped a game built on a tech stack that I think we're going to end up talking about at some point here. Um, and we kind of proved some of the theories that I had about how AI could influence games. Um, and of course, I'd been sort of saying there's going to be more to AI in games than this. And behind the scenes, the monkey's paw had curled. And 22 happened. ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion showed up at about the same time. Zynga executives sort of said, "Hey, we need somebody to figure this out. Hey, don't we have some AI people sat in the basement? This is a basement gremlin problem. Give it to those guys." And we found ourselves running Gen AI governance for all of Zynga. Um, and taking that as seriously as we could, not just framing it as being the AI police, which you have to be to an extent, but also trying to be inclusive of, recognizing all the concerns, making sure that every discipline is represented from ops to production to engineering. It's not just art and engineering, it's everybody, it's touching everything. We've had a lot of conversations with HR even and recruitment within HR about what the implications of AI are for that side of the business. This is something that is having such widespread impact. So we kind of ran all of that for Zynga, and I guess we did a decent job because we got asked to kind of start setting up the same stuff at the enterprise level for Take-Two, and towards the end of 2024, we were told, "Hey, you're going to be a Take-Two team from now on," and that was effective Jan 1, 25. And we got about 15 months, and then another leadership change. I think there was a bit of a. I don't want to comment too deeply because I do have a separation agreement to protect. Spoiler alert. But shift in priority, shift in strategy, and having a central AI team was decided that it wasn't the move, and the whole team got let go. And that was a few months ago now. So that's the story in a nutshell. Like I did warn you before we started recording, I tend to ramble and go long when you ask a short question. There's your flavor of how that's going
Oh,
to
I
go.
love it. I love it. It's perfect, Luke. Let's start right then at that beginning. Like you said, you were you picked up papers on AI and you're printing them out. What did the world think AI was then? What was the reception like? Typically, was it like, hey, Luke, why are you picking up this subject? Like, what is this all about? And you
Well,
must have seen that journey basically evolve to what it is today. So I'd love to get your perspective on how it began.
so yeah, I mean, God, maybe we don't talk too much about what the perception was when I was a teenager. Maybe we skip a little bit ahead. Look, I mean, AI for years. When I said AI, most people I talked to thought Terminator. They thought the Robin Williams, was it Robin Williams movie with the little kid?
Oh,
Uh, uh, the movie with the little kid with an actor who may or may not be Robin Williams. Um,
I'm not
you
sure I
know,
know it, but yeah.
I think it was called AI, but it was like about it was I don't know. It doesn't matter. Um, uh, it was science fiction. It is really the point. Like, so you would talk about AI to mainstream people, and blank. It really was sort of like a thing that they'd only seen in movies. Um, and when I started going, my first GDC I think was 2012. And back then, it's only recently gone away as part of the GDC's restructuring into the Festival of Gaming. But there has been an AI summit at GDC for a long time. But in 2012, what that was an awful lot of NPC coordination, making the bad guy shoot back, making them duck behind cover, like in a way that felt realistic. Um, and a lot of what we talked about back then was the smoke and mirrors of like portraying intelligence without necessarily having access to intelligence. Algorithmic perception of intelligence, let's say. And then you've got, recommender algorithms and the machine learning stuff that's been around for, a fair few decades at this point. But like, the big tent picture of AI has been all those things, right? Um, the way that I think about AI is anytime you are automating a decision. And that is a very broad, techie kind of interpretation. And it's also overly broad, right? Because you could almost quantify like an if-else statement as like part of making a decision. And I think in some ways it is, because if you've got a really complex decision tree, we call those expert systems, and that was AI for a long time. Um, uh, you know, uh, so that's one piece of it, and there are so many different ways of thinking about what this stuff is. The other way that I think about it is like, or at least pre 22, there was a sort of throwaway gag. How do you know if something's AI or computer science? Well, if it works, it's computer science, and if it doesn't work yet, it's AI. um, and that really was it. Like, one of the things that I've been kind of wrestling with to an extent is like I've identified as the game AI guy for, probably 15 plus years at this point. And that means something radically different today than it did, 5 years ago. Well, yeah, 5 years ago. And it's kind of caused me to think about why, what was it that got me excited to begin with? And what is it that really gets me out of bed in the morning? And, it's never been about the tools themselves for me. They have been a very obvious tool set to achieve innovation and like genuine innovation and like pushing on the boundaries of what games can be and what they can do and the player experience and a lot of how I think about that comes back to kind of growing up in rural England, being a deeply autistic, socially introverted, nerdy kind of archetype, and not having a community to play something like D&D with. And what I think about, like, what did that kid need? And that's kind of like, what did that kid need? What do kids today need? Where is this medium going and what can we make it be? And like for the first 10 years of my career, AI was a shorthand against that because it was all about innovation. It was all about frontier, pushing the boundaries. And now it's not. And that's weird. And that's been a very kind of awkward transition for me to kind of come to grips with. I've forgotten
So,
what the question was. Was that an answer?
yeah, no, I was actually going to say this is it's a great segue into, I guess, what you and I were talking about at the beginning before we started this interview, which is you're thinking about this from a very product-led decision by the sounds of it, community-orientated. Nowadays, and what I've seen a lot from the finance side is a huge amount of um, description or a lot of words being used by management teams, CFOs, CEOs around this topic that maybe when you were looking at this 10, 15 years ago and you thought, oh, I'm just making a better product for the community, that layer of people probably were not engaged with in the same way. So what we're trying to do here is trying to bridge those two gaps together, right, in some ways. So what I wanted to do then was basically ask you, well, what is that distinction today? When you said there's a whole group of people who are now talking about it, what's the big distinction between AI then, AI today, and what do people mean when they say, oh, okay, we're implementing it, or we have a generative AI, and how does that make you both feel as well as explain that?
Let's deal with feel first. Bad. Feel bad. So look, the and recognizing the kind of merging of worlds here, I do want to, like you say, I'm a tech, and very candidly, I've been nervous about this session most of the week because I know I'm coming to talk to a finance audience, and we don't speak the same language, so I'm going to try my best. Uh, so when we think about AI and generative AI in particular, which has very much co-opted the AI label more broadly. Um, what we tend to be talking about is, I mean, it used to be image generation, video generation. That stuff seems to have very much kind of taken a back seat, probably because of the costs involved, honestly. I mean, OpenAI killed off their Sora product. I don't think they actually disclosed the reason, but the prevailing wisdom is just how unprofitable it was. Um, so a lot of what we're talking about now are these large language models, things like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, if you're a Google person. Um, what they are, so ChatGPT, the underlying technology behind all this stuff, it is the GPT part, which OpenAI didn't invent. That actually came from Google in 2017. Uh, so GPT is generative pre-trained transformer. Transformer is the name of the mathy algorithm bit, the bit that kind of really tells you what's going on. Generative and pre-trained. Um, Generative, because it generates new content. Pre-trained, because what they've done, and it's a little bit reductive, but it's also not too far away from the truth, is suck up the entire internet and shove it into the neural net and stir the entire internet up and ask it questions and hope that it gives you the right answer. Uh, so that's kind of where we're at is, um, we have the Gen AI systems that are pre-trained. And in a lot of cases, the kind of distinction I would make is intentionality. Um, when we sit down as like AI practitioners, we sit down to make a NPC behavior tree for making a bad guy shoot back, or a recommendation system, or a level generation system. Generally, historically, we've started from blank slate and we've said, okay, what pieces of information do we want to bring into this? So you can think about that in like classic machine learning terms. What are the features that are important to know whether somebody's going to retain in this game? Um, and if you're being ethical, so 50-50 chance, um, there's a lot of things that you don't put into that. If you are wanting to get a clean read on like how likely somebody is to spend money in your game, you want to key that off of in-game behavior. You don't necessarily want to key it off of like IP address, location, zip code, and any other thing. Because that is where your bias creeps in. That's where the racism creeps in and the classism and all those things. And those are things that it's important to be mindful of kind of trying to exclude from the conversation. Generative says throw everything in, see what happens. Uh, it's the distinction between bottoms up and top down, basically. And you have these systems today that are being billed as effectively silver bullets. Uh, Ask Claude about your finances and about this and about that and about how to build a good product and how to, and notionally, Claude's this amazing kind of oracle that knows everything. Um, in truth, Claude sucked up the entirety of the internet, including Reddit, and you know you will get some fairly deeply mediocre answers to a lot of things. And like, that's not, there is not no value in that. I am bad at quite a few things. Having something that makes me mediocre at a whole bunch of stuff, actually quite a useful tool. But equally, for the things that I'm good at, having something that's going to give me mediocre answers, probably not that great.
Makes sense. So intentionality, top down,
Yeah.
bottom up as well. So we've got two key themes coming out from this. Um, and a lot of what you're saying here is really about what you would be doing effectively, right? Like within the role effectively, right? This is in the weeds or in the developer side, on the cost side of the argument, as we would say in the finance part of this, right? But then controversially, in the game side, on the demand side, it becomes a lot more difficult, I think, maybe to articulate perhaps some of these decisions to consumers, whether it's generative, and to your point, it just generates whatever you needs to generate, right? So why is it that there isn't, I guess, as much kind of explanation going from that supply to the demand side? And do gamers care? Do they want it or not?
So, I mean, it depends a little bit on which audience you're talking about.
Mm.
I think I don't know if there's a better term for this or a more appropriate term, but like Western audiences, so North America, Europe, seem to be more strongly anti-generative. Uh, and anecdotally, what I've heard is that Asian audiences are more accepting and more tolerant of this stuff. So that's an important divide, is to say that like player sentiment on this is not uniform. Um, Equally, we do see some. Um, there's an awful lot of pushback on the player side, and I think some of this is probably a little bit projection on my part, but also it's kind of joining the dots on some of the sentiment that I've seen, is that lack of intentionality is something that they feel as an audience, and in some cases, I here's where I'm going to get roasted in the comments. In some cases, I think a lack of intentionality is not necessarily a problem, or not necessarily an egregious problem, let's say. Um, there are some creative folks on the game development side who very much take the view that like if a thing doesn't have a reason to be in your game, then why are you putting it in your game? And I think that, for certain games, that's fair. But I would also remember there was a game called The Alters, maybe came out a year-ish ago. And they just had some like background posters in scenes that were generative. They'd come out of AI systems. The game reviewed pretty well. People found out about this. It got a bit review bombed at the time. Um, but also people gave it a bit of a pass. And Claire Obscura was another one where I believe some generative assets had slipped into the final build. People found out about it. They lost a couple of Game of the Year awards over it. But did it impact performance from a business point of view? Arguably, not meaningfully. And I think that, ultimately, what I would say is that there is a massive pushback in the zeitgeist against AI collectively, and I definitely let's say against generative AI. I do want to try to remember to make that distinction when I can. Um, that said, I think a lot of there's this term AI slop, right? You hear it quite a bit. I think that people care about the finished product, and they see the use of generative AI as an abdication of intentionality, as an abdication of authorial intent. And consequently, they assume, in a lot of cases, rightly, I'll caveat the hell out of what I'm saying here, but in a lot of cases, rightly, that that's a pervasive abdication of authorial intent. Um, and I think that there can be cases where that's not true. And I think that we've got a couple of counterexamples in Expedition 33 and in the altars. And the other question is like, to what we see a lot of this sentiment on the internet. And from the business side, the internet's not representative of the mass audience. So to what extent is the anti-Gen AI sentiment mainstream versus vocal minority? I don't have an answer to that. And this is, in a role like my previous role at Take-Two, you almost have to war game out both sides of that and be thinking about, well, what if it's pervasive? What if this is just a blip of a vocal minority, and 5 years from now, this is just kind of more accepted. Because if it's going to be accepted 5 years from now, that's dev cycle starting today.
I think that's a really good point, right? Like, back to your intentionality point of this, it does feel as if the lack of intention, as you mentioned, was one of the areas that kind of causes maybe this reception. Where there is intentionality, to your point, maybe on a product side, to say, hey, we're going to make NPCs more responsive in shooting, and it's going to feel more realistic or something. Is there? I can see you opening your mouth,
Yeah, yeah,
licking your face. Like, go for
yeah.
it,
No, go,
go for it.
finish your thought before I jump down, jump in.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, is there something about this that consumers probably won't even realize that that's in the game if you didn't tell them, and haven't probably realized for maybe 5 or 10 years, like when the original kind of, I don't know, Call of Duties came out or something, and this has evolved a bit more over time. And is it maybe a communication problem too?
So, I mean, this is the sort of game AI versus Gen AI
Yeah,
conversation. You know, AI as a big tent terminology has been in games for a long time, a long, long time. I mean, some of the earliest examples that we cite in literature is like Miss Pac-Man from the 80s had, some interesting algorithmic differentiations in how the ghost behaved that followed set kind of personas effectively. Um, I think generative AI is a different beast, but AI systems have been around in games for so long, and they've done so much. You think about fear is a always a classic example that we reference. It was the Jeff Orkin pioneered a goal-oriented action planning decision system for games, which was allowing them to kind of figure out, allowing NPCs to figure out what they were doing. Left 4 Dead implemented what's called a hierarchical concurrent state machine, which is an AI system for effectively, it was their AI director, is what they called it. And it managed the game experience of what was happening inside of that level to hit a very specific dramatic pacing and intensity curve that they kind of modeled off of horror movies. The way that I think about it is that classically, AI systems have been invisible. Um, they've been algorithms. They've been a good algorithm is fucking boring. Like it just is. Like it's not something that you put on the back of the box because nobody cares. But equally, and this is an analogy that I've been using a little bit lately. Like I don't know what brand of glue or screwdriver or anything gets used in any of the products that I'm buying. Like, I don't care. Like, give me the thing and let's have it not fall apart, please. And like, and after that, I don't care who made the assembly line that you built this thing. Like, none of that matters. And we've transitioned into this world, and a lot because of the kind of business and investor side of the generative AI kind of big tech hype piece of it, where that piece has to matter, where every product effectively has to have the sponsorship jacket on, saying this is made with Claude, this is, and like when things work well, they should be unexceptional. You know, we should, as game developers, for the last 40 years maybe, we have the Game Developer Awards. We have our own internal ways of recognizing when there's been technical excellence, when there's been innovation, when there's been product excellence. I don't understand why we need press releases pushing stuff to get those same kind of to get that recognition today. Like, and it's this weird moment where like if this stuff worked, it could quietly just sit in the background. Like this is genuinely the like think about it. You've been on the M&A side of a lot of deals over the years. Like you know as well as I do, me from the coming up with trade secrets side of it, and you from the protecting trade secrets side of it, if any of the shit actually did what people are billing it as, they would not be talking about it. You would just suddenly see like Prime Video has amazing content with actors that I don't recognize. What's going on? Where are they tapping into this amazing stuff? Why does Microsoft suddenly have the best games on the planet? These would be protected like the crown jewels and Fort Knox combined. Like, trade secrets get protected. They don't get resold it's like the guy sat here telling you that there's a gold rush going and you need to get in on the gold rush. Buy my pickaxe, buy my the guy should be selling you the gold if he's actually got the gold.
It's a very interesting point, and for sure, I think a lot of the what shareholders ask, at least to me, is has always been they'll talk about a company or a game or something like this. They always have that question and tell me about AI's impact on this, or is it exposed to AI? Why is it exposed to AI? How is it exposed to AI? Once again,
Oh,
I can see you restraining yourself,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
good. Like, so the claims are always does it make it more efficient from a cost perspective or a time perspective? Like, how do I measure this? Like, what is the materiality of this? And they're trying to look at it through their own business. Like, is this a good investment because they have this or not? And if they don't have it, is that something that a reason why I shouldn't be investing in this, right? So it's where do you stand on that? Does AI do what it says it does, driving
So
cost and efficiency?
first off, the bit that I was restraining on is like, I'm jumping down your throat, and I don't intend this as hostile as it's maybe going to come across. But like, they've not always been asking you that. They've been asking you that for the
No,
last
yeah,
3, maybe 4 years.
yeah,
And it's before that they were asking about metaverse. Before that they were asking about crypto. This is
yeah.
just the latest trend that they've and it speaks to this kind of like groupthink that has seized a lot of people who, if I was a snarky asshole, which I am, um, are arguably not coming up with their own ideas because they're either not wanting to, not able to, or, have had a few too many beverages over lunch at the country club. And it's easier to grab onto a trend than it is to actually think critically. Um, and this is pervasive. And like Gen AI is the single biggest nexus point of that kind of problem that's endemic to a lot of society right now. Um, but I've never seen it this bad. It's bad. It's bad, bad. Um, Here's the question. Like, the question shouldn't be, well, where's the AI? Um, the question should be like, what does the business look like? You know, and like if AI is doing good stuff for the business, that's interesting, but it's interesting from the kind of IP tech, is this a novel thing? And those are not the questions that I hear being asked. I get adjacent to some of these conversations as the tech expert. And like that's not the conversation. Like the conversation is, well, where's the AI? It's not like, how is this defensible? How is this novel? What have these folks come up with that nobody else has come up with? It's like, well, where did they crowbar an LLM into this thing? Because that's the box you need to tick this week. I've literally seen pitch decks, and I bet you have as well. I have been given a pitch deck where it's like, oh yeah, don't worry about like slide 3 and slide 7 are all about crypto. Skip over those ones. At the bottom of the deck is the new AI slide that actually should be where 3 is. Because we've taken crypto out of the pitch and we're putting AI in this week because that's the box we need to check. And that's the level of discourse we're dealing with in a lot of places. But to actually answer the underlying question rather than just have a rant, um, like there isn't enough work being done to quantify impact. And if if you are a Gen AI true believer, which spoiler alert, I'm not. Um, but if you are, then I think you look at this thing and you say, well, obviously this is so impactful that I don't even need to quantify it. And I often see people throwing around like, oh, my engineers are 100x engineers because of Claude Code. Um, okay, is that true? And like, you're asking it from you're looking to jump in now. I think.
I'm
uh,
restraining. I'm restraining, but
okay,
there we
well,
go.
I'll finish up quick so you jump in because you've done me the same courtesy. But like my belief, my strong belief, and I think we'll have to get to this maybe soonish because I'm gonna throw some stuff out. I'm gonna throw some claims out. Um, the cost of all of this is going to go up. It's going to go up dramatically. And you need to know whether it's 100x or is it 10x. Because if your cost goes up 20x, and it's giving you a 10x impact, get rid of it. If it's genuinely 100x and it goes up 20x, great, that's still upside. And like you are finding it difficult to quantify it from a like corporate valuation side, but even on operations side, that's a really important question that is getting overlooked. But every time people try to quantify it, there was an MIT study that was came out maybe a year ago. They actually revised it. The original study claimed that people were self-reporting 20% speed up, and kind of objective metrics tracking on what this was able to do. Believe this was a code assessment was 20% slower. So a 40% delta and people self-reporting that it was making them faster when it was actually making them slower. Um, that's a problem. And the problem is that, people are not, individuals are not necessarily reliable narrators of what the impact is. So you need to be quantifying objectively, and very few people want to run those case studies. So that's it. You jump in there.
No, no, I was gonna say, why do you think people actually don't want to run those case studies? Very briefly.
Uh, if you're a true believer, it's so obvious that it's having this massive impact that why would you run a case study? Why would you spend the time?
So particularly then, I think the points that you've raised, it's effectively, yes, this productivity boost versus the kind of cost increase that you've had, right? And there has been, and we'll get onto this, but the amount of subsidies that are going into this, right? And you've talked a bit on about Ed Zitron as well when he discusses these things, right? But if I look at like let's take the latest ChatGPT release. Like they are reducing costs on their mid-level models. They keep resetting their weekly limits. Claude are resetting their weekly limits as well for me. So I'm sitting there thinking I've got incredible amounts of value coming out of my monthly subscription. They must be making a big loss on me, right? On a monthly basis. And I'm feeling, okay, I'm getting some productivity. In fact, I'm getting a lot of productivity improvement with the way I do my work. Having said that, there are issues that come about, right? Like there are new problems and challenges I have to face, which takes up time from the time that I've saved. So to your point, I sit there thinking, well, okay, but when this subsidy stops, will I still want to be paying for this? And is this actually worth it, right? So I guess it sounds similar maybe to the point you're raising, which is maybe AI is driving a slight cost efficiency in the short term because it's subsidized, but actually people can't really, haven't been able to measure. I think it's what you're saying. They haven't been able to actually measure what the productivity increase is. But they're definitely going to see the cost increase at some point because they're going to see that in a number. Is that fair?
Yeah. And, as much of a hater as I come across when I'm talking about this stuff, like, I again, we'll probably get roasted for this. Like, I usually have a Gemini tab open somewhere. It comes, I want to have Google Suite. I want to have my email handled by Google. Gemini is bundled into that right now. They have jacked the price up on me because of all the AI capabilities. But like, I'm paying for it anyway. I'm cutting my nose off to spite my face if I don't play with it. In some cases, I'm getting some amount of value. Some of that value is literally that they've made their search box so terrible that this is just a replacement for a Google search for me. Would I pay for that as an independent product? I'm not going to say definitely no, but I'm certainly not saying definitely yes. But in
And
this moment, it's bundled. Who cares? Let's use it. But the problem becomes, and I would imagine your use cases are similar, like stopping when the prices jack up is going to be not that hard. But think about it from a studio point of view, where you bake it into a pipeline, and that pipeline has now rigidity, and you are now vendor locked to something that you know is going to get its price jacked up. I mean, look at how people reacted. And obviously, we're going outside of AI land right now. But look at how people reacted when Unity tried to change their subscription model. And that we're sleepwalking into that same situation with a lot more upfront awareness that that's what is probably coming.
to your point, you're sleepwalking into it. You raised another point earlier that was really interesting. We have to make those decisions today about the games that we're building, right? In 3 years, 4 years' time. And you're locked into those subscriptions maybe at that point. So effectively, what does that mean for studios, right? Should they be, using local models? Should they be fine-tuning their own models? Like, how are they going to get around these two? What should they be thinking through? What are they thinking through at this stage?
So, I mean, a lot of it depends on the risk profile that you're prepared to take on as a studio, and you're at Take Two, and 2K, you know how different the vibes are studio to studio. Like, you've got a studio like Ghost Story. Ken Levine is very adamant and has taken this position in interviews publicly that doesn't want anything player facing, and I believe Jen McLean, who was on the show a few weeks ago, has a very similar stance. Nothing player facing should be generative, and that's fair. You've got other studios that are just like YOLO, like, and if you're a startup, if you've got runway for the next 6 months, like, hey, you should probably use all the subsidization you could possibly get right now because, like, get in while the getting's good. But more than anything, like, it really is having that kind of awareness and forethought that, like, this era of subsidization is probably going to end. I mentioned Unity, but the model that I often come back to, Ed Zitron rails against using this as an analogy, but Uber, not for very like, oh, it maps one to one, but Uber used their VC funding to acquire market share, undercut taxis, displaced taxis, and once they'd kind of got that kind of market lock-in, they started jacking the prices up. I mean, and then by that point, they kind of trained the behavior into the users. So well, you live in London, so maybe this is a bit different for you, but like, I could not tell you the last time I actually took a taxi anywhere. And that's the trap here is not like the trap is not being aware. It's the sleepwalking of the thing. Because if you look at it today and say, hey, I'm going to use all this stuff because it's cheap. And when it gets expensive, I know what my ROI is, and I know that I've built these pipelines modular enough that without having to do a whole bunch of rework that I won't have runway for, I can just sub stuff around. That's what sustainability has to look like, right? Because otherwise you just get held hostage.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's how I would have to think about it. You see these headlines from places that you would imagine have organizational maturity to not get screwed over like this. But like ServiceNow, I forget, I think it might have been their CFO or maybe their CEO said at some conference, yeah, we just don't know what our next invoice is going to look like from whichever of the model providers they were using. Uber burnt through their entire 26 budget for AI in Q1. Like, like these are organizations that are supposed to be serious organizations that you would imagine would have guardrails against this stuff. But I think, the FOMO and the newness and the velocity and all of these things are contributing to an environment where you can't get the guardrails down fast enough to actually prevent some of the crazy.
So what does a company do then in order to do that? Like, would they be suggesting to, I guess these days we're seeing people set limits on like the amount of tokens you can use, right? Really basic
Oh,
things.
now!
Yeah. But like, how does that then change the workflow and also headcount, right? There's the other part of that equation too, where companies initially said, okay, AI is going to we're going to have to let go of people because of AI. Now we're still seeing layoffs, and they're saying it's not because of AI. And then they might have to rehire people because AI isn't doing what they thought it would do. Where do we sit with that part of this?
Dude, I mean, these are the questions that everybody should be wrestling with, and far too many people are just kind of shrugging, and I guess we just cross some lines out in a spreadsheet and we move on. But it kind of speaks to, man, I've come on the business show to really push an anti-corporate, anti-capitalism message. You love to see it, but like seriously, this is where the short-termism and the quarterly finance report kind of optimization really starts to fall apart because you've got a thing that is happening, the impact of which is not going to show up for a couple of years, maybe, or certainly a couple of quarters. So you're incentivized to make the choice that makes the next earnings call look good. And this has been a problem with the system for years. It's just that the Gen AI moment is exacerbating it. But like the system does not really have a mechanism for rewarding long-term sustainability or long-term performance even. It's always how can we claw something into this quarter? Can we claw something into this fiscal year? Can we delay a cost, even if it's just the cost of the invoice showing up into next fiscal, just to kind of make these numbers look good because we're going to be judged on these numbers tomorrow. I don't know how like the system is not set up to incentivize people to think about what happens a year from now, what happens when we have to shift these things around. And the kind of knee jerk that you get from something like AI, where the hype is so strong, it's so, you can't get away from it. You open up, you just watch TV and somebody's advertising some AI assistant to, why? Remember when we just got to show like cold medicine and groceries and stuff? Um, like, it's a wild moment, but like if we're not thinking about long term, then everything's gonna blow up pretty quick.
So
Like,
what do you? Yeah, well, I mean, like if we're thinking long term, do you think the private game studios, are having a very different conversation around this topic then to maybe the public ones?
I think I think that has to be true. Um, and one of the reasons it has to be true is that public companies have to play to market narrative. Private companies don't. So I think they've always been able to have different conversations. It's just that like there is the the lightning rod that has attracted all the conversations is this one thing right now. And there is this sentiment that like if you're not having that conversation, you're gonna be left behind. But I don't know that that's strictly true. Uh, and you look at I think that it's always been the case that if you are a privately held group, particularly if you're, well, privately held by people, not privately held as EA now is as of yesterday. Privately held and not in service to $1.8 billion in debt a year. Um, you know, you get to you get to have the conversation you want to have. And if you want to have the Gen AI conversation internally, you can, but you don't have to. If you want to have the, hey, everybody's piling onto this trend, but we're not going to, you can have that conversation in a way that I don't think you get to do public style. Like, there is an expectation that you are saying the things about the thing that a bunch of young lads on Wall Street who've never built a damn thing in their life want you to be talking about.
Makes a lot of sense, right? Like the conversations, the
Makes no
long-termism.
sense. None of this
No,
makes any sense.
the long-termism, sorry, the long-termism makes sense, just to be clear. That's what it is. But there are some interesting deals that have happened within the space, right? Like for both frontier model companies and video games companies, and the one that comes to mind is CCP and DeepMind getting a stake in that, right? And CCP make EVE Online. What do you think of the deal, and what do you think of the value of the data maybe that EVE Online has for something like this, and why would they do that?
So I'm a recovering Eve addict.
Ah,
Uh, I spent a good probably 60 hours a week in Eve throughout You remember when I got a 2-2 in my undergrad program? Yeah, Eve.
ah,
Um,
okay.
but equally, I could go off on a tangent about Eve for a very long time. It's also where I learned a lot of like applied data science. That game is like I was going to say there should be like PhD theses written about it, but there actually are. There are economics textbooks written about that game. Like it's wild. Um, the DeepMind partnership is definitely interesting. I'm not I- I'm not sufficiently familiar with what the intention is, and I'm not sure that they've even disclosed what the intention is to really speak to like how effective it's going to be. Um, I will give you the same line that I gave the last person who asked me about this, which is like if you're trying to learn anything about like human behavior by looking at Eve Online, you're working from a flawed premise. Like the people playing Eve are barely human, and I say that as one of them. Um, uh, More generally, when we think about like, world models is a buzzword that I've not heard so much about lately. It was big kind of maybe 6, 9 months ago, and it's tailed off a little bit. I'm much more skeptical on world models. They are fundamentally the the math is it broadly parallels LLMs at a certain level of abstraction, and people will want to nitpick and everything else about the details of that. But like the premise is broadly the same. Throw enough data into a neural net, stir it up, and then you can create new stuff. And you saw this with the Genie 3 Google demo, which was sort of February, March time. Um, what you sort of didn't see, because most of these AI labs are very good at the PR game, is that those demos really fall apart after about 30 seconds, 60 seconds at max. And the lack of intentionality makes it really difficult. Now, if you have sucked up all of the internet and have all access to all the text in the world, and you're good at making code, but the LLM creative writing is pretty flat. Um, why is it going to work to just take a whole bunch of other data, stir it up, and suddenly generate something that's orders of magnitude more complicated? Uh, this just feels to me like creating a new buzzword so that the hype train can jump to the next thing. Cynicism aside, for studios, it's an interesting proposition, right? Because whether I'm right or wrong, big AI labs are getting a bunch of money to throw around in this space. And studios have a lot of training data. I mean, Unity famously had a whole B2B unit for using Unity as a simulation environment and training for autonomous drones and autonomous vehicles. I believe they backed out of that business. I don't for sure. Somebody who digs into their financials might actually be able to get in the comments. But I don't like it's a good cash injection, I think, but it's not necessarily the place to build a business because I don't know
Yeah.
how sustainable it's going to be.
So maybe I thought of this maybe as a two-way street from your perspective, right? Like if people are taking advantage of the models because of just how cheap they are at the moment, and we know they're going to rack up prices, but there's a lot of cash sitting around. And similar to your Uber analogy, does it make sense then, if you can, if those companies, those front-end models perceive value also in a two-way street, we value your data, right? We value what you have
I-
here, maybe for training, maybe not for training purposes, but they're willing to give you cash. Is that it might be a very temporary thing to your point, but is that something that helps studios in the short term? And
Look,
yeah.
if somebody's making you an offer for your telemetry about your world, probably I'd make that deal. Probably. I wouldn't structure it in any way like as a rev share. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, you're gonna give me a check for a thing, and 18 months from now, that thing's probably gonna blow up in your face. Sure. I'll take your money. Um, that is probably it's probably an opportunity for certain studios, and we're probably talking about the majors because the majors are where that quantity of data would live to be meaningful. Um, but sure, I'm not averse to somebody getting their pound of flesh. Absolutely.
And what about mobile, seeing as it's your kind of background, right? Like the efficiency of, LTV, CAC, day 7, day 30. Like, surely this is like a data heaven, right? As in, if you're able to get a little bit more efficient on, your return from a player or something like this, someone I'm guessing and looking somewhere is going to think this is an amazing source of data for us.
So I think the answer is yes, but not for generative.
For
And the
sure.
conversation is so exclusively around generative. But I mean, this is
Mm.
this is kind of the pitch that Zynga gave to me in 2014 was like, hey, you like all this AI machine learning stuff. We have the biggest data set on the planet. I forget how big it was. But Zynga had been logging telemetry on Facebook before most game studios knew what telemetry was. They regularly are on stage at AWS events talking about the ways that they use their database and their big Redshift cluster. This is a big thing, and that was not this craze. That was data science machine learning. Was like the pure analytics component of it. Um, and yeah, I mean, there are ways you can do it. Now, most of that data, and I'm not speaking specifically for Zynga, I'm speaking in generalities, and I need to make sure that I say that out loud. But most of that data is pretty like it. No two game teams log things the same way, even when they use the same word. Um, And like this, I'd mentioned to you before we started recording, I used to do due diligence on some of the M&A deals. Like part of that is figuring out what do you mean when you say this? Um, even something that you would imagine would be fairly straightforward. Installs, let's say. So somebody installs the app. That's an install. Later on, they've left, they've gone off, and then they reinstall the app. Is that an install? And like your business probably has one definition, and hopefully your database lines up with that definition.
So very as all these things go, everyone's got their own definition, everyone's got their own way of looking at things. So consistency and actually just having a harmonized data set is difficult, right?
And that's, when you talk about like monetizing and commoditizing for training purposes or for like large data set purposes, like that's the problem that you run square into because somebody's got to actually sit and harmonize that. And that's hard. I say from firsthand experience, that's hard.
So the challenge is still back there, and that's probably a challenge that has been going on for many years, even when 2014 when you picked this up, right? Like, and every time another deal has happened, and integrating this data set and a new game and that consistency, or maybe the metric changes, like that's a continuous effort, really. But not something I'm guessing to your point, AI really plays a lot of a role in today. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some ways that you could kind of squint and say, okay, well, like let's turn an LLM loose, say that three times, on like your wiki and your taxonomy definition and everything else, and maybe we might be able to like standard, to
Hmm.
extract what your database means when it says that. But that's like effectively creating a key for the database. Like
Yeah.
that's not like where so it's probably not fair to say that there's no role for AI in this.
Hmm.
But equally, it's not a silver bullet that's just going to make the problem go away.
Yeah, makes sense. So generally, when we think about those emerging companies who will be working in video games with AI, I think you've also said this. Corporations, they never make the first version of anything. They're either going to buy it or they're going to see someone else doing it and say, we want to clone that, right? Um, what does that mean for AI? And what does it mean for what, publishers are looking at today when they're thinking about this particular topic? What are the types of things that they're going to say that's a useful addition to us if we went out and bought it or built it ourselves?
So in some ways, I think it comes back to some of what I was saying earlier. You know, the corporations and again, big sweeping generalities that I'm going to claim are true and probably are not true at a micro level. But corporations are not good at funding true innovation. They're very good at painting a narrative around what they were going to do anyway is innovation. Um, but the same is sort of true at the investor and finance level as well. Like whatever, put it this way, whatever consensus has established around is probably the wrong thing. Uh, and like I'm not just saying that to be a contrarian. Like, you know, the thing that is going to change the conversation, change the entire, change the face of the industry is not the thing that are a whole bunch of LPs are sat talking about right now. Because if it was, then it's already kind of conventional wisdom. The thing that I would be looking for, the thing that I hope we'll see what happens. But if I were to go off and do a thing, the thing that I would hope would be the sort of selling point is like conventional wisdom is to zig. What happens if you zag? What happens if you break from that herd? Because all you can do by following the herd is follow. And whoever figures out, like that, I truly believe, and again, most of my hate here is around the hype machine. I think that LLMs are actually an interesting piece of technology as a piece of technology. I think that they are not a $1 trillion business that's going to revolutionize every like, but as a piece of technology, I want to figure out what these things could do for games. But I don't want Jensen to ram it down my throat because I don't think he's right. Um, Somebody's going to figure it out. Somebody's going to figure out interesting ways to apply these things to games. And NVIDIA's pitch is, embodied NPCs that you can ask any question to, which misses the point of what a game is. Games are curated experiences. When you look at a dialogue tree and there's three options, yeah, you could make that 50, 100, we could have made it 100 options without generative AI. But then you've got to figure out which of you've got 100 options, but only two of them get you where you actually are trying to go. Adding more options is not the answer. So like the NVIDIA tech demos where you can talk to the characters, probably not it. There's a lot, InWorld was really chasing that. A few other places have, and a lot of them have kind of fallen by the wayside because I don't think it's right. I don't, Today, I can't say this is the answer. And if I did, wouldn't say it out loud right now. Uh, but somebody's going to figure it out. And that is going to prove itself in the market. And then your Microsoft or name a major player is going to come along and it's going to be a conversation with somebody like you. And the thing that drives me crazy about the kind of consensus driven groupthink is it really kind of allows you to write off the things that are a little bit weird, and it allows you to not take a punt on a flyer. Uh, and if we think about like the heyday of innovation and the heyday of Sand Hill Road, like it was never kind of everybody getting together and deciding which technology we're all going to invest in, which is about where we are today. Like, I don't know if that would constitute like actual like uh, kind of group, whatever, collaborative, something that gets the SEC involved. But like, so I'm not accusing anybody of fraud, but like this consensus-driven thing, I think it is sanding a lot of the sharp edges that are where the interesting stuff happens. And so coming back to the original question, look for the weird stuff. Look for the stuff that is kind of odd, but seems like actually it might work. And like odd but might work is worth taking a shot on.
If only we could get what the that $1 million answer is out of you there. I know you won't say, but that's fine. But no, it makes sense, right? And like one of the things that always comes to mind is like COVID, we had a huge influx of capital into video games, right? And just generally this industry. But this time round, it doesn't really feel as if it just doesn't feel the same. Whether or not that's true, I'm not particularly sure. But to your point, like, who are the people? Are there enough people out there looking for the weird and wonderful as there should be?
So I think that the answer is no. Um, it's it's unfortunate right now. Um, and I'm going to cite a specific example, which is picking on A16Z a little bit. I've got some friends over there, so apologies in advance if you see this. But you look at something like Speedrun. Speedrun started as a kind of incubator program for games, and it's broadened out beyond games now. And it's still very AI. Um, it's 2026 and it's Andreessen Horowitz. It sort of has to be very AI. But they've broadened beyond games, and I think that there's a lot of you know, I, right now I think, and you've had JDR talking extensively about this previously. Jen touched on it in her session prior to that. Funding right now in games seems like it's tough. It seems like it's real tough. Funding in AI seems like it's real silly right now. And that creates a weird spot for me at the intersection of the two. Because like, which bucket do I end up landing in if I were to go and try and do something? Am I a games person or am I an AI person? And like, I don't know. And also like, I don't know that I want some of that silly money, right? But at the same time, like, it's easier to not. I think if you want to win on games, then you have to win on creative, and that's a crapshoot. Um, and then the shine's gone off SaaS a little bit, so nobody really wants to try and make a middleware play here. Um, so I think the new term is service as a software. I heard that last time I was in SF, and I'm not entirely sure I know what that means. Um, but it's I think it's easier right now to not do games than to do games. So a lot of the folks who are chasing what's next, I think probably are sticking to more traditional ways of harnessing stuff. And that's the people who are trying to harness anything other than OpenAI's API, which that's not innovation. Let's say that out loud. Um, so, you know, there is interesting stuff happening, but it's fringe. It's real fringe. Um,
That is a
and
shame. That is a shame for now, I think, in the cycle. But to your point, we are kind of here, and we've got to go back up that escalator. I think, hopefully,
yeah,
and getting both the innovation and the capital together, right?
and I think, the fact that, capital costs more today than it used to. And that is making people more. I mean, it's taken things that were a bit risk averse and made them risk phobic. Um, and the problem is that innovation inherently implies risk. You know, you have to be prepared. And this is what the VC model originally was. Spread betting, and one of them pays off. But all the eggs are landing in the one basket, and it doesn't look, to me at least, it does not look like a great basket.
Yeah, I think yeah, that seems like a really fair way of putting it, really. So what are the people in the companies doing about this now? Like say you are in a big publisher, you're getting told to use AI and use these tools that exist for you. Like where do you think like the issue is probably with hiring at the moment? Because it seems like less people are hiring younger folk at the moment to help actually build and create maybe some of these assets or whatever it might be for games, right? And like, what is that going to mean for even our talent ladder in the next couple of years?
Scary. I mean, this is something that I think, you know, is the we talk an awful lot about the downsides of generative AI, and I say we, like, just collectively. We hear a lot, let's say. Um, the the layoff conversation is the obvious one. The hiring conversation is the scary one. And we are creating a world where we will not have seniors because we're not hiring juniors. And like, what does that say about the long term? Like, I keep saying this word sustainability, but like, really, that's the ball game, right? Like, how do we have an industry 10, 20 years from now? An awful lot on top of all the AI stuff. I worked a lot actually with Jen McLean at the IGDA and the IGDA Foundation, kind of mentoring, getting younger folks their start, kind of helping students transition into industry. Um, that is tougher today than it's ever been. And there's a couple of reasons for that, not just AI. I mean, you have that same kind of group thing happening in academia where how many institutions now are just cranking out game dev students. And more students graduate than there are positions. So competition has been getting fiercer naturally. Layer the AI element and this kind of, again, it is this short-termism that, like, oh well, we don't need to hire juniors because, like, you know the AI is basically a junior, and that's on a good day. Like, I tend to be like, yeah, it's an intern. Like, you can give it a task, and as long as you check its work, yeah, you might get something. And I know that that's not true in certain cases, and I don't want to get yelled at by all the engineers who are having it do whatever. Um, but hiring, you don't just hire juniors for the output. You hire juniors for the cultivation and, you know, historically for building up your corporate talent pool, right? I mean, if you go back, roll the tape back 20 years, how many people were long-term employees? It's a hell of a lot less common today than it used to be. But you hired for potential, you hired for people that you could grow and turn into what you wanted them to be. And over time, we've moved away from that to a point where I think we've lost it completely now. And we've got, we're a young industry in a lot of ways. We've not seen too many generations age out of the workforce yet. It's going to start happening, and it's going to start happening on a more regular basis. And then the house of cards maybe falls over. So that's happy fun times.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's quite sad actually, but it's interesting because I've always found at least the youngest people who I talk to are the most AI native actually, and the most willing to adapt to the way that they work and actually just embody generally the change a bit better. But then perhaps on the converse side, oh, you're looking at me now. Oh,
Yeah, no,
look
no,
at. But just
I'm, I think that they are the most polarized. I think it is how
yeah,
I.
sorry, correct. Yeah, you're right. But I believe that's it. The ones who adopt, they definitely are adopting it, but then there's a lot of people who obviously don't want it at all either. But my question was really going to be more around, do you then see actually you know, publishers, maybe mid or bigger size ones, becoming more, having more individual contributors really around people who are able to scale workflows using tools? Because we've seen this a lot more, particularly with the frontier companies and some of the challenges there. But I'm wondering if that's actually changed anything in the way that, if you're a management or something at one of these companies, you're thinking, "Oh, actually, the way that everyone who does their work could be changing slightly. Um, do like do we need to think about this in a different way in an organizational perspective?
So, absolute cop out answer, yes and no. Um, well, it comes down to the extent, like we still, I mean, we've been going for a while now, and we still haven't really got into, we've kind of taken it as read that there's going to be some kind of market adjustment here.
Yeah,
Um, and here's the thing. If the crash is bad enough, no, we don't need to change anything about our organization because we are in a momentary blip. If I'm wrong, which I'm not, but if I am wrong, um, then everything about work about is starting to shift, and like the sort of press the sort of think piece that's actually a press release for Dario or Sam to talk about how amazing their thing is are correct, and what's interesting is I think that you're right at a organizational level that like more people become ICs. But what's interesting is that the IC role probably looks a hell of a lot more like management because you're managing agents, which is like, you know, running a team of interns. And like that has to look a lot more like what being a kind of, first, second level manager sort of looks like. But probably we're not going to give them manager titles, they'll still be ICs.
I think that's
So
a really fair way of putting it. And also, there's probably some value in actually how people can prompt, right? And actually get the most value out of their quote interns of
a
agents,
hundred
right? Yeah.
percent. And some of that. The interesting thing is that LLMs don't. They take in natural language, but they don't understand natural language in like the same way that we do. So you've got these weird tricks like talk at it like a caveman, it saves you tokens. And it works. Why does that work? It's wild. But like, there are there is an entire new skill set in this thing. But equally, there's whole new sets of threat vectors around cybersecurity. There's a whole bunch of new implications around, data protection, data privacy. Like the game changes not just in this axis, but like every axis. If this becomes a sustainable trillion-dollar industry that stays around and continues to touch every part of our business, which is the big load-bearing if in the thing.
Makes sense. I guess, yeah, like just hitting home on what you said here throughout the whole conversation, which in some ways makes a lot of these questions redundant that I'm asking, which is, hey, this is a bubble, effectively, right? It's not something that, you believe is going to make long-term changes in the same way, and there's a lot of hype around it at the moment.
Yeah, one thing that I will say is I think that there will be an amount of long-term changes. But like in the way that the industry had to sort of figure out how to adopt like 3D tools like Maya, it's not going to be the seismic shift. That's my sense. Um, could be wrong.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've gone through a lot, I think, at the moment. Let's think about finishing this a little bit, and I think I'm going to start with one of the quotes. Riccatello, who used to be the CEO of EA and CEO of Unity, actually. Near the end of his time when he was running Unity, he pitched a future where you walk around EAFC or FIFA Stadium, you could chat with the fans, and your reaction was roughly, "What is the point in that?"
That is the PG version of what I said
That's
for
the
sure.
PG version, yeah. Do you think that statement stands basically still today with where the topic is and how you would describe, I guess, a similar sort of quote?
I think that this kind of comes back to the thing that I was saying about NVIDIA earlier. It's a fundamental misread to think that players pick up FIFA or EAFC because they lost the license, right? I'm not a sports guy, but it's a fundamental misread to think that like they pick that up because they want to play with randos. Uh, I mean, what John's describing is something that you can achieve without a video game. You can just go down the pub, talk to some people, and start and join a five-a-side league. Like, John's talking about having a social life and having friends, uh, and trying to insert AI and video games into that conversation in a very odd way. Um, the underlying misread is that like games are trying to deliver on a player fantasy. Whether that is the fantasy of fantasy of swinging a sword and killing a dragon, or the fantasy of running an ancient civilization and growing it from 600 BC to the space age. There is a fundamental thesis to a game, and what you what you put into that game needs to align with that thesis. Um, what part of wandering around a stadium talking to random, like just Joe Schmo off the street who's showing up to watch a football game and pulling them onto the field to play with, like, what part of that is remotely now take that same thought process, take it to Watchdog Legions, where you're in London, you are running a revolutionary cell, you're recruiting people off the street. Now we're talking about something interesting. But I mean, Watchdog Legions did not use generative systems. It's not a requirement to use an LLM to get to that kind of an experience. You could argue that the Watchdog system could have been pushed further with an LLM. I think that there's pros and cons. Um, but fundamentally, if you're not looking at what the cool thing is that's in service of the game's thesis, that's in service of the player fantasy, what are you doing? Because that's just shoving That is just shoving stuff in to tick the finance earnings call investor box rather than trying to build the best damn thing you can build that's going to earn the most money because it's building something that people want.
Wow, that's a perfect way, Luke, I think, to finish this one off.
Man, I had all these numbers here so that we could talk about.
But what's next for you? Okay, so you and Jen are going to Dice, right? Dice in
Yeah.
September, right?
So Dice is kicking off a EU speaking tour for me. So Jen and I are going to be talking. Oh dear, I should know what we called that panel, and I don't. So we're having a fireside chat, and if I can vamp for 10 seconds, then I can get to it. The AI Reckoning: What Survives the Hype Cycle is the name of that. Um, Jen and I, we've been close for an awful long time. Jen's, I mean, you know yourself because you had her on. Absolute legend in the industry. From starting at Microprose all through running 38, and the work that she did at AWS and Xbox. She's got such a. We've been talking about the hype and the challenges and all the stuff that we kind of haven't touched on here for years. In fact, Jen is actually who forced, she was the one sending me the Ed Zitron articles, being like, "Yeah, you need to actually read what this guy is saying," which honestly made me even more worried about the future. So we're going to be talking about a very pragmatic lens, and like I said, kind of what we've been talking about here. I mean, obviously, it'll have Jen's perspective on it as well, and we'll be framing it a little bit more for a studio executive audience because that tends to be what Dice is. But like pragmatically, AI is not something you get to just write off. Um, but equally, it's not the silver bullet that the headlines and the press releases want you to believe it is. So what is the kind of pragmatic framework that people can think through that makes sure that they're not missing the thing completely, but not overcommitting to a point where they end up out of position if the bubble does pop. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about in Athens. And like I say, that's the start of a speaker tour for me. I'm going to be in Norway. I'm going to be in Scotland. I'm actually coming to London. I'm going to be doing sessions, it looks like, at Queen Mary University and King's College. Um, and then headed to Finland for Finnish Games Week to wrap things up. Um, in terms of bigger picture, what's next? I am still figuring that out. We got let go from Take Two in April, and the thing that I sort of said to myself is I've been running hard for about 15 years, and I just wanted to take a minute, and it was an opportunity to kind of take a step back, spend some time with my dad who's been visiting for the summer, spend some time with my puppies, sitting out in the sun, doing some grilling. Um, I've I've kind of been talking to a whole bunch of organizations about, I think that CAIO is the latest or one of the latest crazes, and it's if I'm right about the bubbleness, it's going to not be a long-term position that people need. So I'm doing a lot of kind of talking to people in a more of an advisory consulting fractional kind of way. And like I alluded to, starting to think, I've been talking about the ways that AI could drive innovation for games for a long time now. You know, there is an element that maybe it's time to put my money, ideally somebody else's money, where my mouth is, and start a studio to try to build what I consider to be, the right way of approaching this and doing it in the most responsible, most ethical, but most impactful for players, not for investors way. Which is probably the wrong thing to say if I want to get somebody's money.
Hey, you're being honest. You're being very transparent. We love it. So thank you very much, Luke. And how can people contact you?
So you can find me on Blue Sky, where I am at luke.d.bsky.social, I guess. And I'm around LinkedIn. You can, Luke Dicken on LinkedIn. And my personal website, which has nothing on it right now, but will have at some point. It will be Luke. Yeah, well, it is lukedicken.com, and it will be when I start writing some stuff. I've got a few blog posts. They're a little bit incendiary. I've been a little bit hesitant to pull the trigger on them, but getting to do sessions like this. So thank you so much for inviting me on to have this conversation. It's one way or another, it's going to be an interesting ride getting to the other side of this Gen AI stuff. So, I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
Well, thank you so much, Lou, for giving us so much time as well. Really appreciate it. And thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
to anybody who's got to the
Yeah,
end of
yeah,
the video.
that's what I was thinking too. If you got to the end, thank you so much.